July 5, 1943, 02:30 hours, Moscow time. The Kremlin is nearly silent, its long stone corridors dimly lit, shadows stretching beneath vaulted ceilings. Outside, a humid summer night hangs over the capital, heavy and still. But deep within the fortified complex, in the underground command room Stalin has transformed into his wartime nerve center, the air trembles with a tension felt rather than heard. A telephone rings. Not the usual metallic buzz, but the sharp, coded chime reserved only for frontline emergencies. A duty officer picks it up, listens, stiffens. Within seconds, footsteps echo down the hallway toward the situation room. Inside, Joseph Stalin sits at the large, rectangular table strewn with maps of the Kursk salient, red and blue pins clustered so densely they seem to pierce the paper. A lamp casts a small pool of yellow light across his face, emphasizing the deep lines etched into his features by 2 years of war. His pipe smoke curls upward, forming thin gray coils in the stale underground air. The officer steps in. His boots click once on the stone floor, then halt. "Comrade Stalin, it has begun." For a moment no one speaks. The room holds its breath. On the table, radio operators shuffle nervously. General Vasilevsky lowers his gaze. Marshal Zhukov, standing rigid with his hands behind his back, watches Stalin's expression carefully. The news is unmistakable. Germany has launched Operation Citadel, Hitler's massive, long-delayed summer offensive aimed at crushing the Soviet salient at Kursk. The largest armored assault the world has ever seen is now rolling forward. Stalin removes his pipe from his mouth. The ember glows faintly in the darkened room. "So," he says quietly, almost to himself. A pause, a long exhale. "It has begun exactly where we expected." He does not raise his voice. He does not look alarmed. But the sentence carries a weight the generals instantly recognize. Not triumph, not fear, but confirmation. After months of debate, deception, and preparation, the moment has arrived. Artillery reports begin streaming in, thousands of German guns opening fire along a 200-kilometer front. Soviet listening posts relay the thunder, the ground shaking, the night sky tearing with flame, tank engines rumbling like distant storms. The question hangs unspoken in the stale Kremlin air. How will Stalin respond now that the greatest land battle in history has just begun? To understand Stalin's reaction in the early hours of July 5, 1943, one must step back 6 months, back to the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, where the German Sixth Army collapses in February. The Red Army's victory there sends shockwaves through Europe, but in Berlin, Hitler interprets the disaster differently. He becomes convinced that Germany must regain the initiative with one decisive blow. That blow is Operation Citadel. The plan is simple in theory, catastrophic in ambition. Pinch off the Soviet-held Kursk salient from north and south, encircle hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops, and stabilize the Eastern Front before Western allies can build strength. The offensive is to be led by Germany's most celebrated commanders, Model in the north, Manstein in the south, supported by nearly 3,000 tanks and assault guns, including the new Panthers and the massive Tigers. But Hitler hesitates. He postpones the attack once, then twice, then a third time, waiting for more tanks, more ammunition, more assurances. Each delay gives Stalin something more valuable than manpower or steel: time. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin holds tense briefings throughout April and May. His intelligence chief, Lavrentiy Beria, provides decrypted communications confirming that a major German offensive is coming. Partisan activity behind German lines reports tank concentrations near Orel and Belgorod. Even Allied reconnaissance photographs, flown from distant England, show unmistakable signs of mobilization. By late spring, there is no doubt Hitler will strike at Kursk. Kremlin War Room, July 5, 1943, 03:10 hours. The telephones no longer ring, they scream. Operators relay messages from the Central Front, Voronezh Front, Steppe Front, each line carrying the same urgent truth. German artillery has opened fire across the salient, and armored formations are moving. Stalin stands now. His chair sits pushed back slightly, one leg catching the edge of a carpet. He holds his pipe between two fingers, tapping it lightly against his thumb as though marking each incoming report with a metronome's precision. Zhukov steps forward. "Comrade Stalin," he says, his voice firm but controlled, "the Germans are attacking with their full strength. The offensive is confirmed along the entire front." For a moment, Stalin says nothing. His eyes drift across the map: Belgorod, Aboyan, Ponyry, Orel, names that by sunrise will be written in fire and smoke. Then he speaks. "Good, let them come. We will break their teeth." Witnesses recall the statement nearly verbatim. Some say he uttered it in a low, calm tone. Others remembered a sharper edge. But all accounts agree. Stalin's response is not panic, not shock, only resolve. The phrase would later be repeated in memoirs of generals who stood in the room that night. He leans over the table, placing his palm beside Zhukov's notes. "Notify the fronts," Stalin continues. "Begin the counter-prepared artillery strike immediately." This order is decisive. Hours earlier, Soviet commanders positioned along the line had requested permission to unleash a massive preemptive bombardment the moment German movement was confirmed. Stalin had waited. Now, with the offensive unmistakably underway, he nods. Vasilevsky issues the command. Within minutes, more than 3,000 Soviet guns roar to life across the Kursk sector. Their thunder rolls across the steppe, drowning out even the German bombardment. The counterstrike hits assembly areas, rear echelons, and advancing infantry. Reports begin returning to the Kremlin. Enemy formations delayed. Tanks regrouping under heavy fire. Southern thrust disrupted. Stalin listens silently, absorbing each fragment of information. His face remains expressionless, but his hands, usually still, grip the edge of the table with controlled tension. "Remember this," he reportedly says to Zhukov in a lowered voice. "Hitler believes he can force our lines to collapse. Instead, he will bleed himself dry." It is not a boast, it is a prediction. One built on months of intelligence, preparation, and a strategic patience Stalin rarely allowed himself. All around him, the greatest land battle in human history has just begun. The debate among Soviet high command is fierce. Zhukov argues to remain on the defensive, let the German attack crash against deep fortifications, then counterattack when the Wehrmacht is exhausted. Rokossovsky and Vadutin, commanding the northern and southern flanks of the salient, quietly agreed. But Stalin's instinct has always been to attack, to push forward, to reclaim territory aggressively. This time he hesitates too. He listens. He weighs the evidence, the maps, the warnings from the front. And for the first time in the war, he authorizes something he once viewed as unthinkable, a strategic defensive operation. The Red Army digs in 8 defensive belts, 300,000 mines per mile of front, camouflaged gun nests, anti-tank ditches, overlapping artillery zones. By June, the Soviet position resembled a fortress built into the earth. Historians would later agree. The Soviet leadership knows almost everything: the timing, the direction, even the likely strength of Hitler's coming blow. And so in the final days before July 5th, the Kremlin waits. Quietly, deliberately, with a confidence built not on hope but preparation. Morning of July 5th, 1943. As the sun rises over the rolling wheat fields of Kursk, the scale of the German assault becomes clearer. Dust clouds stretch for kilometers behind advancing panzers, while the earth trembles beneath the weight of armored divisions pushing towards Soviet lines. In the Kremlin, Stalin receives updates every 20 minutes. The situation room fills with the scrape of chair legs, the shuffle of boots, the constant hiss of radios. Aides replace maps with fresh overlays as the front shifts hour by hour. At Ponyry in the northern sector, Colonel General Rokossovsky reports brutal fighting. German armor attempts to break through the first defensive belt, only to be met by hidden anti-tank guns and minefields. Rokossovsky's voice, transmitted through static, is steady. Enemy progress limited, casualties heavy on both sides. Stalin listens, nods once, and instructs Vasilevsky to reinforce with reserves held in the second line. Further south, General Vadutin faces the full weight of Hoth's 4th Panzer Army. Panthers and Tigers spearhead the assault, their engines roaring, machines built for decisive breakthroughs. Yet their advance slows as they hit Soviet defense belts, trenches, artillery nests, camouflaged gun pits. Reports from the Voronezh front describe entire tank columns forced to halt, while engineers struggle to clear mines under constant fire. Back in Moscow, Stalin's demeanor remains controlled, almost detached, but his decisions are swift. Transfer the 5th Guards tank army to readiness, he orders quietly. Alert step front, prepare for commitment. These commands ripple through the hierarchy. In underground bunkers outside Kursk, officers scramble to adjust deployment plans. Field telephones ring non-stop. Soviet pilots warm up engines on forward airfields still littered with morning mist. By midday, Soviet reconnaissance confirms something unexpected. The German advance is slower than anticipated. Citadel, designed to be a rapid, crushing pincer, is already grinding through layers of resistance. Stalin receives the news with a rare moment of visible reaction. He exhales deeply, sets down his pipe, and leans back slightly in his chair. He's losing time, Zhukov remarks, standing beside him. And time is blood, Stalin replies. In Berlin, Hitler issues enthusiastic statements to his generals, insisting the offensive is unfolding according to plan. In truth, both sides know the clock is turning against the Wehrmacht. Every hour the offensive stalls is another hour the Red Army draws breath. By evening, Stalin gives one final order for the day. Hold, bleed them, and prepare to strike. The tide has not yet turned, but the balance is shifting. In the weeks that follow the opening of Operation Citadel, the scale of the battle grows to unprecedented proportions. Soviet and German armies clash in fields churned to mud and ash, culminating on July 12th in the thunderous tank engagement at Prokhorovka, one of the largest armored clashes in history. When the dust settles, the Germans have failed to break through. Their offensive stalls. Within days, Hitler calls off Citadel entirely. Stalin receives confirmation of the cancellation on July 13th. He does not celebrate. He does not smile. Instead, he issues a characteristically restrained remark to Vasilevsky. Now we take the initiative, and we keep it. Historians later note that this moment, more than any other, marks the true turning of the tide on the Eastern Front. After Citadel's failure, the Wehrmacht never again launches a strategic offensive in the East. For the first time since 1941, the Red Army prepares to advance not in desperation, but in confidence. Over the next weeks, Stalin authorizes a series of powerful counteroffensives. Operation Kutuzov in the north, pushing the Germans back from Orel, and Operation Rumyantsev in the south, striking toward Kharkov. These are not limited attacks. They are coordinated, multi-front offensives designed to grind down German forces already weakened by Citadel's failure. The German high command reels. Manstein attempts to salvage the situation, pleading for reinforcements to restore the line. But Hitler, increasingly distracted by the Allied landing in Sicily and fearful of a second front, refuses. For the Wehrmacht, the loss of initiative on the Eastern Front becomes permanent. Stalin understands this even as the battles rage. In correspondence with Zhukov later that summer, he writes that the Germans have exhausted their reserves while ours continue to grow. It is a blunt assessment, reflecting a new strategic reality. Soviet industry now outpaces German production. Soviet manpower outnumbers German divisions. And Soviet intelligence, honed by the experience of anticipating Operation Citadel, operates with increasing precision. Decades later, military scholars would identify the German attack on Kursk as the final gamble of a shrinking empire, and the Soviet defense as the first true demonstration of a modern, coordinated, deeply fortified response. The failure of Citadel is not merely a stalled offensive. It is the collapse of Germany's last hope for regaining the strategic advantage. Stalin's reaction on July 5th, calm and deliberate, would prove prophetic. Germany had indeed broken its teeth on the Soviet defenses. And the Red Army would now begin the long, relentless push westward, toward the Dnieper, toward Belarus, toward Poland, and ultimately toward Berlin itself. In the quiet, predawn hours of July 5, 1943, Stalin could not know every twist the coming battle would take. He could not foresee the exact number of tanks that would burn on the steppe, or the thousands of soldiers who would never see another sunrise. But in that moment, when he heard the words, "It has begun," he understood something deeper. The outcome of Operation Citadel would shape the war's future. His response, calm and measured, reflected a shift not only in Soviet strategy but in Stalin himself. The leader who once demanded reckless offensives now embraced patience, preparation, and coordinated defense. The result altered the trajectory of World War II. Citadel's failure marked the end of Germany's strategic initiative in the East. From that moment forward, it was the Red Army that marched west, pushing the front line village by village, river by river, toward Berlin. What began as a desperate struggle for survival in 1941 became, by mid-1943, a determined advance toward final victory. The Battle of Kursk is remembered today not only for its tanks, its trenches, or its scale, but for what it revealed: that leadership decisions made in small, smoke-filled rooms can alter the fate of nations. And on that July morning, Stalin made his